Map the process improvement. You'll see in the toolbox that there is a map for process improvement. And today I want to run through with how do we do that process. So some of you might be familiar with this, some of you may not be. So if you're not, or if you're wanting to improve the way that you do it, by all means, take a listen. So when we're dealing with process, you want to determine the legends that you're going to be using. So if you're going to be doing that, if you're using Microsoft, for example, they actually have process legends within the Microsoft toolbox. If you're using Google or something else, you might have to create the shapes and agree on what those shapes are. If you're using, so some of them, and you want to also look at, am I going to use icons or am I going to use shapes? Because increasingly people are starting to use icons. But whatever it is, everybody must agree on what each shape means. So it's important to develop agreement so that you can then utilize the flow. So for example, if we have a look at some of these processes, we'll see here that the oval shape at the beginning typically means beginning or end of a process. If we're talking about any physical activities that are undertaken in a process, often that's represented by a rectangle. Whereas the diamond shape often represents decision points within the flow. So you want to put your decision points in there and then also undertake, well, who's making that decision? You also want to take into account files, whether we're talking about a single file as in the shape in this case, or whether we're talking about multiple files. And you also want to look at the direction of the flow, the time it takes for the flow to occur, whether people are time poor and things like that. So really be clear about your process flow legend and do that first. Once you've done your process legend, you want to think about, well, what's the reason that we're developing this process flow chart? Every process has a reason, and often it might be to, let's find out what we're actually doing. And typically that's the first thing that we'll do before we work out how can we improve it. So be clear about why you're developing the process flow chart. In the process, you want to identify the very start and the very end. So, and what does that look like? So, and again, whether you're using the icons or the legends. You'll later discuss, after you've identified the process, you might want to later, when you're looking at how do we improve the process, to discuss, is this the ideal place to start and is this the ideal place to end this process? But for now, what we want to look at is where does it begin and where does it end? So the next steps after developing the process is to develop the various steps within the process. So whether there are 3 steps or 10 steps or 25 steps, it's not about the number of steps. It's not even about the quality of these steps. It's literally about what are the steps right now within that process. And you want to go and put in the legend that you've already agreed on the shapes or the icons to identify what's happening with the process. So where does decision making occur? Where are the documents? Are we talking multiple documents? Are we talking single documents? And when we're looking at the people, you want to not identify the person, you want to identify the role of the person. So who is doing this role? Is it the marketing manager? Is it the CXO? Is it the financial person? So what is the role of the person, not the actual name of the person? So the other thing you want to look at in your flow chart, and unfortunately not enough people do this in my opinion, is identify any roadblocks, hold-ups, delays. Because the reality is I've never met a process in my experience that doesn't have roadblocks, hold-ups, delays, people trying to, particularly if you're trying to implement change, there are always those people that are trying to stop the change from happening or to sabotage the change taking place. So you want to deal with those frustrations that cost time, money, energy, effort, and resources, and identify these up front. Because if you can do this now, what happens when you're going through a process and you're trying to implement change and you're trying to implement ways to improve that process is that you can start to look at, and again, not now, but later, when you're looking at how do we improve that process, you're going to come back here and go, well, here's 3 roadblocks. This is often where it gets hold up. It gets hold up at this particular decision-making person's role. And is there a way that we can change that? Do we need a different person to have that decision, or what can we do to help that person so that we can move things along faster? And you do this after you've mapped out the process. So they're 2 separate sections. One is develop the process first. The second is then how do we improve that process? So you've got to agree before you can improve anything that you've correctly mapped out the flow of the process and included any diversions, because in flows, when we're talking about a process, is a flow. And sometimes flows get diverted, and sometimes diversion is good, that it circumnavigates, for example, a roadblock. But sometimes it's a negative thing and it can actually disrupt or delay a process. So you want to look at any diversions that have happened, any disruptions, roadblocks, delays, or obstacles. And it's important that everybody agrees that these do exist before we can work out some strategies on how we overcome them. So what I normally recommend is after you've done this activity and you've developed the actual process diagram, take a break, whether it's a 15-minute coffee break or whether it's a lunch break or whether you come back to it the next day. But the idea is you're going to come back to a brainstorming session and you need to have a complete break before you hit brainstorming, because you need to be fresh for your brainstorming session. So when we're trying to improve something and we're trying to look at ways that we can make it better, we often will have either a brainstorming session or an ideation session. And there's multiple different ones that you can have, and you just jump into the toolbox and have a look and grab out some different ideas to see which of these works well with your team. Just try them, because everybody's different, each team is different. So what I suggest is you conduct a brainstorming or an ideation session to collect a range of ideas on where the process can be improved and the ways that it can be improved. So it's just where and way. You also want to be really clear that somebody's facilitating this process, and the person who's facilitating this process makes it really clear to everybody concerned that there's no judgment. We do not judge ideas. All we're doing is taking ideas down. And you can refer to any of the materials that we have on conducting brainstorming sessions and ideation sessions on how do we do that. And then not only how do we do that, you also want to look at these sessions on how do we then refine those ideas down, how do we then prioritize those ideas down, so that we can actually start to move forward and make progress on those ideas and move the powerful ideas or the really strong ideas that are likely to improve things and create results. How do we move them down the innovation management pipeline? And you'll need to gather some other tools out of the toolbox to help you with that so that you can actually make improvements on your workflows. So, as I said to you, after collecting the ideas and before judging the ideas, map the ideas along the process flow. And this way, the ideas are seen by everybody in relation to where they sit in the process. Refer to the sessions on ideation, developing concepts, and reducing ideas and concepts to see the various ways that you can evaluate these ideas and organise the evaluation of the ideas. And as I said to you before, I really strongly suggest you do this on a different day after your initial brainstorming session, because the evaluation of ideas and the brainstorming sessions are both sessions that take a lot of time. They don't have to take a lot of time, but they take a lot of energy and effort and creativity from the team, and the team typically get exhausted. So having them both together on the same day is, in my opinion, kind of crazy, because it doesn't work as well as what it does when you're on separate days. So if you want to lead in growth and improve the way that you manage innovation, map your ideas and then work out how you're going to evaluate them on a different day.